Have you ever found yourself in lawyer mode when discussing an issue or having an argument with your partner? Now, there's nothing wrong with making valid points and trying to communicate them clearly, but when you find yourself in that real energy of justification, that can actually point to a problem. And in today's video, I'm going to give you tips around why you need to beware of lawyer mode and what to do about it. Hey everyone, I'm Sonia, and on this channel, I give you tips and strategies to help you have the healthiest relationships you can and to help you heal your attachment style. So let me give you an example of my own lawyer mode from recently. It was the end of the day, and my partner brought up something he wanted to add to the schedule for the next day, and it was a weekend. And that's all it took. I went immediately into lawyer mode and was explaining first the reasons why the thing wasn't going to necessarily work out. Then it really shifted into why I wanted the scheduling to work out differently. But this was all done in, this lawyer mode, this justification, including about the weekend and why this particular weekend, was different, supposedly. But the truth, friends, is that it was actually me being triggered. This is a very common trigger of mine. It takes only one quick thing about scheduling to put me into this, and it's this trigger that I have around consideration and being considered. So yes, if my partner had realized or remembered that I get triggered very easily around it, that could have been kind to me to bring it up in a different way, and useful for him as well, because he then would have more effective communication with me. But the important thing for me was that it was a good clue for me as well, and it was one that I eventually figured out in this situation, though it took me a while. And that's what I want to help you with. So how can we beware of lawyer mode and use it as a clue for what's really going on and how to proceed? So the number one tip really is around the fact that I wasn't acknowledging that I was being triggered. And that can be hard to do when you're already triggered. But like I said, that lawyer mode can be a clue. And that justification, it's really that sort of energy of justification that's in the lawyer mode that is the clue. Because why are we feeling like we have to justify? What was really going on in a trigger is that I was having a core wound activated, and I was going more into that place. So what was really at hand was this vulnerability and this thing that was going on for me underneath it all. And all these layers of justification were trying to serve towards me not acknowledging that and wanting it to have all these reasons, right? I didn't want it, I think somewhere subconsciously, I didn't want it to be about my trigger. I didn't want it to be, just a trigger, or like that somehow that would make it invalid or something like that. And so I wanted it to be about all these practical, valid reasons. And so that energy of justification can point to why are you feeling like you have to be justified, and like what's really going on there. Is it that you need some sort of airtight case? I mean, there can be some circumstances, like I said in the intro, where you are trying to practically sort something out. But if you're in that energy of justification, there's probably something else going on that you're trying to keep more suppressed or buried. And to get at what's bothering you, you really need to notice that and try to get under that layer of justification. So tip number 2 is that you really need to explore. It's kind of a tip and a next step. You really need to explore what really is going on. So a couple questions can be useful here. Asking what you really want can be useful. And in this case, that was helpful. That actually helped me pretty early on to figure out that it was about being considered. That's how I made that shift from talking about whether the scheduling item would actually work in the schedule to how the scheduling was happening in the first place. So asking yourself that, what is really the problem here, or what is it that I really want in this situation? And you might find that these reasons that you have in lawyer mode aren't actually directly correlated with what it is you actually want. So that can really help you figure out what's going on. And then another question to ask, and one that could be useful if you're not getting to it at that point, is what am I really feeling? And that's really important because sometimes what you're feeling doesn't make sense at first. And that's also your clue. Like what you're feeling might not make sense with what you're talking about and what you're trying to explain and justify. And that was true in this case. I wasn't feeling overwhelmed, like, oh no, we're packing something else into the day. It was really about this feeling of feeling maybe like alone, because of feeling like I wasn't being considered. And so kind of that two-step process of figuring out what I really wanted and what I was really feeling helped me understand that that was that wounding at play about being considered, and that it was really those feelings driving it, and that was really the issue at hand. It actually didn't have to do with what I was first talking about and trying to explain and justify. And the third tip about this is to do with the other person who's in dialogue with you, because they very well might not be catching that it's a trigger of yours. And when you go into lawyer mode, it actually can throw them way off track, right? Because you're sort of trying to throw yourself off track for what's really going on by burying it. So you might throw them off track too. So number 3 tip is just to really realize that and be aware of lawyer mode, because it's going to get the other person off track if you're really justifying something that isn't the root issue at hand. And then number 4, related to the feeling aspect, is that it's really important to be aware of lawyer mode and to get out of it if you see yourself doing it and justifying. Not only to understand what's going on, but so that you get into that mode of vulnerability, which lawyer mode very much is not, right? That's that logical justification, very different state. And to actually solve the issue at hand with the other person, you're going to need to get more into that vulnerable feeling state of what's really going on. And so this tip is both around understanding that that needs to happen, that you need to get vulnerable, and that would be the next step in what you want to do. Try to really feel in and get vulnerable. All right, and then tip number 5 is that usually in lawyer mode, it can cause a lot of problems because it's much more likely in the course of that someone might feel blamed, right? In this case, I was definitely implying, if not outright stating, that my partner hadn't gone about the scheduling question correctly. And while it may be true that it could be useful to handle it in a different way, really it was my trigger, and so that would be really important at the outset for the other person to understand, and they're much more likely then to understand why they need to do something differently. Not to mention that it's very hard for people to cooperate if they're feeling blamed. So it's much more likely, again, if you go into lawyer mode and you're in that energy of justification rather than vulnerability, much more likely that your dialogue just overall isn't going to go well, and then you're going to have some of those negative pieces like someone feeling blamed that happen. All right, so that's what I have for you today about lawyer mode. Hopefully you can see how it's both something to be aware of, but that you can also use as a clue to hopefully help you along, which is kind of difficult when you're already triggered, at least to some extent. If you're really far along in a trigger, it can be harder, but if you're a little early on in the trigger, use that lawyer mode as a clue that you are justifying and that there's probably something else going on in there that might even be a little bit different from what you're arguing about, and that needs you to bring forward your vulnerability in order to communicate and get it resolved. Do you find yourself going into lawyer mode a lot? I'd love to hear about any examples of this that you have in the comments. If you found this content helpful, I would love it if you would like, share, and subscribe. I'd love to get this content out to as many people who'd find it helpful as possible.